Hebrews chapter 3. Ah, the good weather's here, huh? Time for grazing in the grass. Tara's at home. She was cutting up boxes and she's exhausted. Absolutely exhausted. Moving's a pain, you know? So as I was drinking my iced tea, I was telling her, you know, take a break, sweetheart. Love you, honey. I think she's watching.
Turn it off.
Hey, what's that guy doing in my road? Hey. Hebrews chapter 3, let's take a look at this. Let's go back a little bit because he starts with therefore, which means go back and see what it's there for. So, verse 14 in chapter 2, inasmuch as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. For indeed he does not give aid to angels, but he does not give aid to the seed of Abraham. Therefore in all things he had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted. Therefore, because of this, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Jesus Christ, or Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house. For this one has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who built the house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. And Moses indeed was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which would be spoken afterwards. But Christ is son over his own house, whose house we are, if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm to the end. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion in the day of the trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. He's quoting from Psalms. Therefore I was angry with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief and departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. Verse 15, while it is said, today you will hear his voice, do not harden your heart as in the rebellion. For who having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness, and to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. We're going to handle the perseverance of the saints and the security of the believer next week. But what he's saying here is the fact that you endure to the end proves that you are indeed a believer in Jesus Christ. It's not you better endure to the end to prove that you're a believer, but the fact that you do endure in Christ shows that you're a believer. Just because some of you are thinking right away, oh God, I can lose my salvation when you read stuff like that. So I'm going to move that out of the way and get into the crux of this morning. Two most important things in the world: the glory of God and the soul of man. Mankind needs two things to fulfill that. Number one, we need to hear from God. We need someone sent from God to tell us about God. And here we see that Jesus Christ is our apostle, our sent one. He's come to woo us to the Father's heart. He came from the Father's heart. He nestled in the Father's bosom, John chapter 1. And secondly, to fulfill the other one, we need a way to go to God, and that's where the high priest comes in. The high priest is someone who holds his hand on the shoulder of God, the shoulder of man, and he communicates between the two, the heart of each. And he is the way to God, this high priest. So Jesus is our apostle, our hearing from God, and he is our high priest, our way to God, you see. A word from God and a way to God. This is how this is unfolded. See the structure and the order of this particular epistle. And Paul, and it's not Paul, we don't know who it is, could be Paul, but he's writing to dispossessed Jewish Christians. They're under persecution, they're losing family, they're losing friends, they're losing businesses, homes. They can't go to the temple anymore, and the author is trying to explain to them, you have something way better than all of this. Way better than organized religion. You have something way better than all these rituals and ceremonies. You have the person of whom it speaks. There are pictures of a person who is Jesus Christ. We don't have a religion. We have a person who loves us, who is powerful, who is all-knowing. And so the high priest sacrifices himself. He is the sacrifice. He is the high priest to take us to heaven. Jesus is higher than the angels. He's emphasizing here. He created the angels. He's saying he's consider his superiority over Moses. Moses is your man. Moses is everything wrapped into one, and he's better than Moses. He made Moses, just as a builder to the house is, Jesus is as a builder of the building. Jesus built us. Jesus built Moses. This is what he's saying. He created him. He's the builder of all. And so, in short, Jesus made Moses. So Jesus is to the people of God what the builder is to the house. And the more we see that, the deeper we go in this, the greater our faith and confidence and perseverance. Moses was a servant in the house. Jesus was a son over the house. Jesus brings us before the Father to be loved as the Father loved Jesus. Remember, we see that in the high priestly prayer in John chapter 17. It says, Father, love them like you love me. It's the whole purpose of Jesus coming is so God can treat you like you were Jesus Christ. Remember, Jesus didn't just die for you, he died as you. And he was risen, and we were risen as Christ. We're given the status of sonship, you see. And so the point here being that children are never unchildren, and you have a perseverance, you have an assurance in Christ. And so as this begins to unfold, obviously they're talking about, there's a parallel here, because here you have Jews, once again, now that their Messiah has come, here are Jews, once again, who are looking to draw back. Remember in the wilderness, they said, hey, we're going to die here. What's God doing? Our lives are falling apart. We're going to starve. We're going to die of thirst. All these things. Egypt was better. Let's go back to Egypt. All these things. Well, this is what these Jews are doing in the New Testament now. You know, hey, wait, this is salvation. This is redemption. This is freedom. You know, you take us, and we lose everything. I don't understand. We've lost. We haven't gained. You see, and so that's what's happening here in the mindset of these people. Just by way of remembrance, let's look at this in Exodus chapter 14. This is the Red Sea account. A little bit of reading today, but it's necessary for what we want to do. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, that they turn and camp before Hiroth, south of Dundalk, and between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal Zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea, for Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land, the wilderness is closed, and then God is orchestrating it so that they are going to learn how to trust him. And so much of what God will do in your life in such a way look like you are being set up to fail. And Pharaoh was watching them zigzag through the desert, now come back to a very vulnerable place, a strategically very foolish place, militarily speaking. And it's done deliberately, and it's done on purpose, and through the mercy of God, God does that in your life. He takes you places where he's freeing you, but it looks like anything but freedom. It looks like a trap. Remember the manna came from heaven. Remember what they called the manna? What the heck is this? That's what manna means. It means, what the heck is this? How many times has God done something in your life and you're like, what the H is this? You know, in a modern vernacular, what the hell is this? What are you doing? What is this stuff? What is this Red Sea stuff? It's an odd thing to walk with God because he moves very strangely. And he moves in a way to instruct us how different and unique he is from us in the way we do things. Because we rely way too much on those things, and God has to pry our stingy little fingers off our own rationale, off our own history, off our own prejudices, you see. And so here we are. And so in verse 4, that God says, "And I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that we will pursue them. And I will gain honor over Pharaoh and all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord," and they did so. Remember, he already wiped out all of the gods of Egypt. That's what the 10 plagues were all about. The God, Son, the Sun God, this God, that God, the Nile God, the crocodile God. Pharaoh's the last God. And ultimately, in Numbers, he's going to send fiery serpents into the camp, and then he's going to tell Moses to build the bronze serpent. And look at that in the center of the camp, you're going to be healed. And of course, it had a serpent's hood. And those were symbolic of not only Satan and sin, but Pharaoh. And how Pharaoh brings death. Remember, this is death. Egypt is death. You long for Egypt with a faulty memory. Your single life was much more elegant than your married life. You know, you begin to misremember things. You start to think that that the life in the past was somehow better, and it never is. And he goes on, he says in verse 10, "And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, so they were very afraid. The children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, because there was no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may save the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than we should die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, stand still, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." And the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, but lift up your rod, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and the children of Israel go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And I indeed will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, they shall follow them. So I will gain honor over Pharaoh, over all his army, his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh, his chariot and his horsemen." And the angel of God, now this is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ, who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. Thus it was a cloud and darkness to the one, and it gave them light by night to the other, so that one did not come near the other. All that night then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right and on their left. And of course, you know what happens. The Egyptians and their chariots and all the bad guys go in to get wiped out, and then Charlton Heston says, "Good job, Lord," and that's essentially what happens. But over and over again, one of the first things God has to do is he redeems us, he takes us out of the old life. He washes us in the blood of his Son, and that's a type of what the Red Sea here is, because as God's people go into the baptism of Moses in the Red Sea and up into a new life and all those things. But now they have to learn how to live the new life. And after 400 years of being a slave and being inundated with a foreign culture, it takes time to knock the Egypt out of the Jew. It's going to take time. And so it's going to take life lessons, you see. And so there's a battle constantly for our imagination. What fills up the landscape of our lives, the vision of our lives? You see, there's a constant battle. What looms largest in your vision? And all they can see here is, they don't see the Lord, they see the Pharaoh. And they see danger, and they see death and failure in the Red Sea. And so their conditioning kicked in after 400 years of bowing to the world. They say, we must serve Pharaoh or we die. We have no choice. I must go back. This Christian thing is not working for me. And so they've been set free, but they don't know what it means to live free. And so they complain. And so they say, Moses, God has tricked us again. This is not what I thought it was going to be. Well, you might have had false expectations going into the new life. Whoever told you that you were going to get saved and life would be a breeze is an idiot. It doesn't work that way. You will suffer persecution. People will not like you. People will lie about you. The deeper you get into ministry, it'll get worse. They will slander you. Now with social media, it's out of control. And I just want to say for the record, I do not wear women's clothing. So, I was just kidding for those of you that are new. I said, don't worry about that. But here, you see what's happening here imperceptibly. Almost imperceptibly, the mindset of these freshly delivered Jews from the blood of the Lamb on the wood posts. They go from seeing Pharaoh as their enslaver to Pharaoh as their Savior. And it happens to many, many Christians from time to time. And they see God as the enslaver. They see God as the restrictor of what it is that really brings life to fulfillment. Oh, Adam, you can be as God. He's in the way. Okay, so they're looking back from freedom and endless possibilities, and they come to see that their only hope for comfort, protection, provision, for life laid is to lay your life in the hands of Egypt and the world. And so here, that's what's happening. It happened in the wilderness. It's happening to these Jews and Hebrews. To follow God will mean walking away from all that security. It's all how all false gods work. Listen, it's impossible not to give your life to something. You will worship, and you will often fall into some form of idolatry because you're a worshiper. You were made to worship. You were made to give your life to something that is your ultimate source of identity and joy and peace and comfort. It might be pleasure, it might be academics, it might be drugs or entertainment or whatever it might be. This is where your worth is, and this is what false gods do. False gods do that, you see. And so God appoints chariots in your life to drive you back into his arms. Mercifully. It is a great mercy to keep us from loving things that we weren't meant to love in that capacity. You see, so that we should learn to trust, as Paul says later on in other epistles, in the God, the living God, who raises from the dead. That here are the Jews now looking back to the false gods. And one of the things that you're going to find about pharaohs and false gods in this world is that they will demand everything from you. They will suck the life out of you and give you false promises. And then when you're done, they're going to demand that you make bricks without straw. They're going to demand things from you that you cannot do for them. Look at me. I was once in shape. Some of you, I better stop right there. I know I'm going down the wrong path. If I get too creative, I gotta go away. But yeah, they demand that you do things you can't do anymore. How many of you saw Arnold Schwarzenegger got kicked in the back in a YouTube video? I thought that was really, it was, it didn't seem to wince, but, Arnold doesn't look the same anymore. He doesn't look the same. He still is eloquent as he always has been, but he doesn't look the same. But it took 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. And even though they saw all the gods fail and the true and living God destroy these gods, they're in complete bondage, even though they're physically free, conditionally free, saved and going into a new life, and yet still not enjoying and living out that promise. This is a freedom that is often terrifying to people. Many people, and I think your immature people, Christians, tend to gravitate towards legalism. You know, give me the rules. I need the rules. Give me the rules. Tell me what I can do and what I can't do. But when you're given that freedom, it takes a little more thought. It takes a little more consideration. You see, it's a terrifying freedom. And here Israelites left everything they'd ever known into a freedom that doesn't feel like freedom at all. In fact, when somebody was telling me, when you go to the Eastern European countries, they introduce Jesus as the God, the loser God. And it wasn't a derogatory term, it was a way of saying he is a God who subjects himself to loss of everything to give us everything, you see. And so God takes him on the zigzag course. The Pharaoh's sure that an all-wise God couldn't be that lost. So he's going to attack him. He can't be who he claims to be. God plops him in this situation. And you see, freedom means something very different from what we think of today. We think it's absence of any and all constraints so that I can pursue what I want. But that's not freedom. It's never freedom. The pastor was sharing a little while ago. He said, I took my 2 young kids to the toy store. And I said, fellas, you can have anything you want, but as long as it's not over 20 bucks. So they go into this toy store and they are ransacking the whole place. And both of the kids came back and said, with tears in their eyes, I can't make up my mind. And then finally, when they got what they thought they wanted, the guy said within an hour, they never touched those toys again. And what it is, you have to remember that that is a mini version of you and I. And we need to know that our desires are completely conflicting. And they are completely insatiable. And if you bow to that Pharaoh, he will demand that you make bricks without straw again and again and again and again. Let me give you an example. You want to be skinny, but you want to eat. Those are two conflicting desires. Right? And we're loaded with these things. I mean, we really are. How many times go to the refrigerator and look for something you're not happy? You go like 15 times. Frank's raising his hand. Because you don't know. You have these conflicting desires. I want to get up early in the morning, but I want to stay up late at night. Some of you are saying, I want to stay married and have a faithful partner, but I don't want to be faithful. And so there's this conflict, I want to be rich, but I don't want to go to work. You see, and there's no freedom in any of that here. It's funny, and one of the things that I've noticed is that some of the most enslaved people on the planet, and this comes from watching way too much TV and reality shows and stuff, because I sit in a lounge chair all day and I study and I study and study. But I'll leave these TV shows on in case I'm listening to a slow teacher, and you know who they are. But anyway, and you're just kind of like biding the time, and then here comes the rebel without a cause. And he's somewhere in Oklahoma, and he's got half his teeth missing, and he's got tattoos all over the place. And I'm pretty sure he comes here every now and then. But anyway, it's this rebel without a cause. It's this whole thing like, ain't nobody going to tell me what to do. I'm a free man. The guy's constantly hiding in a cage somewhere in an underground, basement, hiding from the law. And the rebel's always saying, freedom, freedom, freedom. And all it is, and they can't see it, is a rattling of chains. It's a rattling of chains. They're their own worst enemy. They're demanding to be led by their conflicting passions. And of course, God's response to that is always, and I think it was Thomas Chalmers wrote a book on it called The Expulsive Power of a New Affection. In other words, what has to happen with these people here, the people in the New Testament, and you and I here, is to replace our trust in these things we look to, and fill our vision with the glory and the greatness of God whom we have. And it's the power of an expulsive new affection, a new beauty. You know what I'm saying? And you can see it all the time. A guy, you learn that principle all through life, right? So you go to grade school. And I'm going to give you the guy's perspective, so ladies, you can really get into the psyche of the guys. Not that you don't know, but I'll reinforce it for you so you can mess with your husband's heads. And you go to school and you see a girl, and it's like, hey, what do you say? You want to go out with a pastor-to-be? And she's pretty. Next thing you know, and I remember the girls in grade school would always write the guy's name up and down his arm like 100,000 times. George. Next day, all crossed out. Fred. Yeah, it's the expulsion of a new affection. And that's a very, very common principle in our lives that God has placed in us, and it was so that we can see the beauty of God, because He's the ultimate beauty. And He will replace any other affection if we properly look at what's going on. You see, that's what He's trying to do here. You see, the most unfree souls are always trying to break free from God's will. And it's why we have politicians demanding babies be slaughtered in the womb. They want to break free from the rule of God. They think they know better. Ideologues are very dangerous people because they feel like, I know better than you what's good for you, and now I'm going to convert you to what I'm thinking. And even if you have to die, we'll get this done so we can make this happen. And you can see that in Marxism and Leninism and Maoism. It's all over the place. But only with Christ will you discover true freedom. Anything less will do great damage to your soul. Remember, birds were made for the sky and are not free till they're released to the sky. And you were made for God. And you are not free until you return to God. And this is what their Creator is doing here. You see? And so God is most concerned with His glory, and He's going to do it through His enemies, and His people's enemies, and Pharaoh and his armies, and all these things, but He knows it's the only way to break the spell of the world over us. And so as long as Pharaoh and the world is glorious in our eyes, God won't be glorious in ours. And then look at what He says here. He says this, that Jesus was there in the wilderness, the angel of the Lord. And you see that name pop up a lot. And you see it in Genesis chapter 22. You see it in Genesis 32. You see it in Genesis 3 and 4. He was in the bush, right? The angel of the Lord. It's Jesus Christ. It's a Christophany. It's a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. And they're looking at this, and what He does is He goes from leading them in the front, and He goes behind between them and the enemies. He puts Himself between God's people and the enemies to protect them. This angel, this Jesus Christ, puts Himself in harm's way. He's going to put Himself in harm's way between this picture of Satan and God's people. And this angel steps in and absorbs the future of the onslaught of death. The one who is God and sent God, the invisible one made visible to our senses, the same one who stood between you and I and death. It's this picture of our salvation here again, even after Passover and the blood of the Lamb on the wood and all these things now. And so here they are, they're free, but they're paralyzed with fear. They're beginning to realize they're not in control of their lives. Let me tell you something. Be thankful you're not in control of your life. The worst person to be in control of your life is you. The worst person, you see. And so God unleashes chariots for us to look behind the circumstances. And so He says, stop. And look at this. I'm going to put on an instructive play. And you see what happens is everything with the Christian life is good as long as the chariots stay parked. And then you become sedentary. And then God says, I got to unpark the chariots. I got to send them into their lives. You know, and here's the thing. As long as the glory, remember what glory means. It means chabad. There's the Shekinah, which is radiant glory, and then the Chabad in the Hebrew, which means heaviness, great weight, substance, value. There's nothing heavier in the universe than God. The glory of God. You drop a rock in a pond, and you feel the effects because the heaviest thing is affecting the entire pond. Well, that's God. And as long as we see Pharaoh's glory as weighty and more substantial and more valuable than God, we're going to be enslaved, you see. And I want you to see that here God comes to Moses, and he said, "What are you crying for, Moses?" Remember, Moses is a type of Jesus Christ here too. He was innocent. He had a relationship with God, but he judges Moses because Moses is standing in place of the people. Moses is their representative here. And he is now being held accountable by God for the attitude of the people. And essentially, God here is imputing the sins of the people to this type of Christ, Moses here. And so here as this begins to unfold here, you look at these things and it's like, wow, look at how God instructs. But then look at Exodus chapter 16. We'll be done with the reading. And here we look at the manna story. All right, let's just bear with me for a little bit more reading. Exodus 16, verse 1. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full, for you had brought us out into this wilderness to kill us, this whole assembly, with hunger." And Matt, do you remember you're watching football, a guy drops a pass, and you're thinking to yourself, "I would have caught that when I was young." You're far more athletic when you're 60 than when you were 30 in your own mind. I just met a guy in my condominium complex here. His son came in 4th place at the Olympics as a 400-meter hurdle guy. 4th place. He was the fastest man in America for several years in a row. I think I can beat him. So I said to his father, I said, "I'm going to challenge him to his race." I thought his father was going to have a heart attack, you know. I was like, "What's the matter here?" But look at what's happening. The world was so much better back then, and all that. Me and my friends had a great time. Half friends are alcoholics, or dad or had cancer. Verse 5, "And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in." Where am I going here? Verse 4. "Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quart every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my law or not. It shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in. It shall be twice as much as they gather daily." Look at verse 9. "Then Moses spoke to Aaron, saying, All the congregation of the children of Israel come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. Now it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, and he said, I have heard the complaint of the people of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So it was that quails came up at the evening, and they covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there was on the surface of the wilderness a small round substance on the ground, as frost on the ground. And of course, so when they saw it, they said, What is this? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, This is the bread which the Lord has given you. He's told you to eat it, and blah, 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 and gather this and gather that. And then you're going to see later on, read it more later, it's just a lot of reading. They call it manna, which means, what's this? They don't have any experience for what God is doing in their lives. And you're going to see that a lot. You're not going to see that it's come from God, because it doesn't correlate with what you've experienced in Egypt. It's an entirely new thing, and God is instructing you not just that his ways are different and unique, but he is different and unique. That his definition of love is far beyond anything. Oh, what manner of love, 1 John. Whoa, what manner of love, foreign love, navigates your life to this. This is alien. Who does this? Remember, David in 2 Samuel 7, he said, "This is not the way man treats man. I'm a man of bloody hands, and I'm going to make a house for God, and he's going to make a house out of me." This is not human love. This is not human wisdom. And less you challenge God and you enjoy God. Enjoy him. He's your hero. He's your Hercules. He's your Archegos. The Greeks sometimes in the New Testament as captain or author or hero or but the Greeks most typically translated it Hercules, their ultimate hero. Jesus Christ, Hercules. He's different than us. And life can be very odd with God. Very strange interactions. And the answers we expect in our prayers rarely occur the way we expect them to occur, and with the people we never expected to come from. And we see people do things, and God provides for you in ways you can't imagine. He instructs you in ways you can't imagine. But I want you to see this in Exodus chapter 16. Look at how strange this is. Here's God's people. Well, we're facing starvation once again tonight. There's no food. We're in the middle of nowhere. If God doesn't provide us with food miraculously in the morning, we're all going to die. So what's he do? All right, let's pretend you're God. What do? All right, you call up somebody and say, "You got any food?" Oh, you know what? He sprinkles something like frosted flakes around the camp. And it's not on the dirt, it's from heaven. It's not touching the dirt, it's not getting dirty. It's on the dew that came from heaven. And it tastes like coriander seed and honey. We'll see if you read it on a little bit later. And of course, the stuff just disappears if it hangs around too long, or it'll breed worms. And some people gathered, every Friday you gathered twice as much so you could have a Sabbath the next day and not go out and work. And all this stuff, and they're like, what? This is strange. And so you're going to see that God leads us off the beaten path. And you're going to say, what is this? What the heck is this? This never should have happened. Never should have happened. And here God is really provoking them. This strange way of meeting your needs, these essential needs, and he does it with hunger. And I want to tell you something. Hunger is a powerful instructor. Because once you get hungry enough, you're just about ready to do anything to get something to eat. And so day by day, after 400 years of indoctrination in Egypt to foreign ideas and worldviews and values and expectations, God is shaping them to be like himself, and he gives them pictures of himself in the way he deals with them. Ultimately, in the fact that he bled to death for them, to make him like himself, to make them a peculiar people. These are slaves, these people. And so here's their baby steps. Remember what about Bob? Got to take the baby steps. Dr. what's his name? Leon Marvis, Marvin. And he starts where they are, barely saved, filled with Egypt's ideas and values and hunger. And we become very teachable. That's, Deuteronomy 8 talks about that. I led you to instruct you. I let you be hungry to instruct you, to make you like me. And food appears every day, and it's obvious God is in all of this stuff here. You see what God's saying, among other things here to these people? I'm going to get involved in your life. You have no idea what that means yet. You are just barely taking baby steps. But I'm going to take you, and I'm going to put you in the wilderness for 40 years, and I'm going to allow you to go through so many trials. And in those trials, I am going to just completely transform who you are and free you from you and make you like me. I'm all in. I am all in to the point. Now, they don't even know what this means yet, but as the time unfolds, you're going to see this fire grows. This fire in the bush that Jesus Christ is in, it grows into a pillar. And then it's going to grow into a mountain Sinai where there's thunder and lightning and death. And then eventually, well, I'll get to that in a second. But right now he's saying, I'm with you. I'm in this with you. In fact, he'll even say, when you go to the bathroom in the camp, cover it up, put it off to the side here, because I am pure. And I'm walking around in your midst. Check it out. It's in Flesholonia somewhere. But now you'll see it. It's in the Old Testament. And I'm going to kick you out in the desert. I'm going to show you who I am. And you're going to say, what is this? What is this? This does not work in Egypt. And grace is very powerful. It can be very confusing. You say, and when you say, what are you doing, God? That's when God's doing the most. When you don't feel his presence, that's when he's closest to you. You're in the shadow of his wings. You can't see him because you're completely buried in his presence, allowing you to not sense him so that he can do something deep in your life. Don't live by your experiences. Don't live by your emotions. Live by the truth. Live by what God has clearly shown to you. There will be times that God will answer your prayers in ways you just don't see. You say, what is this? What the heck is this? And you see it in the New Testament. You see it on the road to Emmaus. They two guys didn't recognize Jesus, did they? What was their experience? It was manna. It was, what is this? Well, Mary in the garden, supposing him to be in the garden, didn't recognize it. What's he doing? He's drawing you in. And he's making you contemplate things that are new and fresh to you, to show you the uniqueness of his character. And in some ways, he hides who he is in order to draw you in and show you the real manna. And there's going to be times where it seems he's hidden, but he's never absent, you see. And so as we grow in these things, and we're just about done here, as they go and they say, look, this whole salvation thing, their whole attitude was this. It seems very tenuous and it seems very precarious to live this way. You see? We remember in Egypt that Pharaoh gave us a reward for being productive, for being useful. It wasn't a great life, but we were rewarded for being productive. But you see what's happening here? He emphasizes Sabbath, 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 rest, rest, rest. 400 years of slavery. You worked every day. And what he's saying here about the Sabbath is this. This is a rebellion against your slavery. I'm pushing back against the things that enslave you. I'm going to make you lie down in green pastures. And I am going to nurture that pasture with my blood. God's gift of bread was a break from the world's exploitation. All over the world, we don't realize it as much as it's a real popular thing to mock America right now. Idiots. Go around the world and see the living conditions of so much of the world and what people have to do for a living. I was just watching some stuff going down in Central America, and it's like the homicide rates with women is just unbearable because the cartel's in control of everything. And the living conditions and the working conditions of most of the people in the world is horrendous. We don't remember, we have no experience with that, but most of the world has experienced that. It was God saying, I will not have my people enslaved to this world. I'm going to give them freedom. I will not let them be exploited. And so every morning, instead of going to Pharaoh for their value in their food, think about it. You came out of your tent, and the first thing you did in the morning, because you had to do it in the morning, if it got too late in the day, it would melt. And you got on your knees, and you gathered this picture of Jesus Christ to your soul. First thing every day. Live that way today. Or everyone around you is going to notice you're not gathering manna. Your children will know it. Your wife will know it. Every day. And so God, day by day, establishing trust in so many ways, slowly deprogramming our hearts. But son, you don't have to do that for my love. I love you the way you are. You're my child. I love you. You don't have to do that. But he does that when they're free, not when they're in Egypt. Why does he do that then? Because each one of us has a little Pharaoh in our hearts that demands and demands and demands and demands his quota of bricks to have value. You know, it's funny to me to watch people, you watch people interact. I was watching this comedian, he was doing his bit somewhere, and a heckler starts to heckle. That proves you're stupid right there. If you're in a comedy show and you heckle, you're going to get eaten alive. Because that's all those guys do, is deal with that kind of stuff. And the guy said something like, I'm better than you because I make more money than you. And the comedian said, that tells me right now you're a piece of filth. And as harsh as that was, it was true to a degree that you would actually say, I'm of more value because I make more money than you. I make more bricks than you make. It's like ants are trying to impress other ants when there's this great God above who created them. You see? And so they go from the absence of God, from God, to the presence of God. He says to them, come to me, I heard you. It says, the Lord appeared. He says, I heard you grumbling. He said, when I get done with this, you will know that I am the Lord, your God, your God. You have to understand, I am the new affection that will evict and evacuate slavery from your life. Now, here's what I want you to see. It all starts off with Moses. Runs into a bush, it's on fire. It's the presence of God, not consuming the picture of his people, the bush, burning bush without consummation. And this fire will grow. And this fire grows into a pillar reaching up to the desert sky. And God's showing you something here. It's the beginning of the journey of his people. Then it becomes an entire mountain, Sinai. And it is ablaze with glory and beauty and thunder and lightning. Touch it and you die. And every time God appears, there's a storm or an earthquake. And so first he shows up and he's in a bush and he says, take your shoes off and bow, Moses. And he says, this is just the beginning. I'm going to take you on a journey. And my journey is ultimately to live in a house of skin, the tabernacle of God in the wilderness. And eventually a permanent temple in Jerusalem. And the invisible king on that Ark of the Covenant with the arms of an invisible oriental king. That's the way it was all set up, of an invisible God. The two cherubim, the golden cherubim looking down into salvation on behalf of man. It begins to move. And the fire grows into a pillar up to the sky to guide us. And then it grows into a mountain, Sinai, and fire comes down, and all these things happen, and 3,000 people die. On the giving of the law, Moses was terrified. Moses shook. Moses shook, why? Because he was made of the same material that the mountain was made of, earth. And God shook the earth, and he shook Moses, made of the earth, thus telling the Jewish readers that Jesus is better than Moses. He made the earth and he made Moses. But then I want you to see this as this fire grows. Jesus goes up another mountain.